Imagine being ordered to crawl into a hole in the ground, alone, in complete darkness, with nothing but a pistol and a flashlight, knowing that somewhere in that tunnel, an enemy soldier is waiting for you. No radio, no backup, no way out except forward. The United States Army did exactly this to thousands of its own men during the Vietnam War, and what those men discovered underground changed everything anyone thought they knew about modern warfare. This is the story of the tunnel rats. To understand why the tunnel rats existed at all, you need to understand what the Viet Cong had built beneath the feet of the most powerful military force on Earth. Beginning as early as the late 1940s during the war against French colonial rule, Vietnamese fighters began digging tunnel networks throughout the Cu Chi district, roughly 75 kilometers northwest of Saigon. By the time American combat troops arrived in significant numbers in 1965, those tunnels had been expanded, reinforced, and transformed into something that had no precedent in any military playbook. The Cu Chi tunnel system alone stretched for an estimated 250 kilometers of connected underground passages, and this was just one network among dozens scattered across South Vietnam. The tunnels were not crude foxholes. They were three-tiered subterranean cities, descending as deep as 9 meters below the surface, with sleeping quarters, field hospitals, weapons caches, kitchens with ventilation systems designed to disperse smoke horizontally so it could not be spotted from the air, and command centers where Viet Cong officers planned operations directly beneath American military installations. The Iron Triangle, a roughly 60-square-kilometer area northwest of Saigon, was so honeycombed with tunnels that American soldiers were essentially walking across a roof without knowing it. And here is the thing. Conventional American firepower could not touch what was underneath. Bombing raids flattened the surface. Defoliation stripped the jungle. But the tunnels survived, and so did the fighters inside them. The Army needed a different kind of soldier entirely. The unit that emerged from this problem was never formally designated with a dramatic name by the Pentagon. The men called themselves Tunnel Rats, and the nickname stuck. They were drawn primarily from combat engineer units and infantry companies, selected not by exceptional physical size but by the opposite. The average tunnel entrance measured roughly 60 by 80 centimeters, barely large enough for a small adult to squeeze through. Large men simply could not fit. The typical tunnel rat stood around 170 centimeters tall and weighed less than 65 kilograms. Their standard equipment underground was deliberately minimal: a .38 caliber revolver or a suppressed 9mm pistol, a standard issue flashlight, and a knife. Some carried a field telephone wire they could trail behind them. Some carried nothing but the pistol and whatever courage they had managed to locate that morning. The critical vulnerability that defined every tunnel rat mission was simple and brutal. The moment you entered the tunnel, you surrendered every tactical advantage that American military doctrine was built around. No air support, no artillery, no flanking maneuver, no numerical superiority, just you and the dark. What the tunnel rats actually did underground needs to be understood in physical terms, because nothing about it maps onto normal military experience. A tunnel rat entered the hole feet first or head first depending on the slope of the entrance, then crawled forward on hands and knees or on his belly in passages that sometimes narrowed to 50 centimeters across. The standard flashlight created an immediate problem. In a confined dark space, the light source is also a target marker. Experienced tunnel rats learned to hold the flashlight to the side of the body rather than in front of the face, so that a shot aimed at the light would miss the head. The pistol was the weapon of choice over the rifle because a rifle cannot be aimed or maneuvered in a tunnel 60 centimeters wide. The revolver was preferred over the semi-automatic pistol because the gases from a suppressed semi-automatic sometimes caused the action to fail in the confined air of a sealed tunnel. Sound traveled strangely underground. Voices carried farther than expected, and the crack of a pistol fired in a tunnel produced a concussive pressure wave that could temporarily deafen the shooter. Tunnel rats reported learning to fire and then immediately close their eyes and press against the tunnel wall to avoid being blinded by the muzzle flash in the darkness. The effective engagement range underground was rarely more than 3 to 4 meters. In many encounters, it was less than 1. Booby traps were the other lethal reality. Pungy stake pits covered with thin matting, tripwire grenades, venomous snakes deliberately placed in ammunition boxes or hanging from tunnel ceilings, scorpions, and in the later years of the war, pressure-triggered explosive devices. A man advancing through a tunnel had to feel the ground ahead with his fingers before putting weight on it, test the air for changes in pressure that signaled a sealed chamber ahead, and listen for breathing that was not his own. Every meter forward was a negotiation with the possibility of an instantaneous and invisible death. And this was the job. The odds were already against the tunnel rats in ways that went beyond the obvious darkness and confinement. The Viet Cong fighters who operated the tunnel networks had spent years underground. Some had lived in the tunnels for months at a stretch, developing a sensory map of every branch, every dead end, every trapdoor. They knew which sections flooded during monsoon and which passages connected to emergency exits, camouflaged as termite mounds or tree roots. The American soldiers entering those tunnels were operating in someone else's home. And here is where it gets interesting. The American military command structure repeatedly underestimated what was actually down there. Initial assessments characterized the tunnels as simple hiding places, temporary shelters used by guerrillas avoiding airstrikes. When the 1st Infantry Division began clearing the Iron Triangle in January 1966 during Operation Crimp, the soldiers sent underground expected to find small, simple passages. What they found instead were 3-level complexes with ventilated kitchens, a fully stocked Viet Cong field hospital with surgical equipment, printing presses producing propaganda materials, and a tailoring workshop manufacturing uniforms. The scale was catastrophic to the original assumption, and because no one had anticipated tunnels of this complexity, the tunnel rats entering them in the early operations had no maps, no guidance on what they might encounter, and no established protocol for what to do when they found a Viet Cong soldier around a corner, in a space too small to do anything except shoot first. The entire concept of the tunnel rat program was being invented in real time, underground, by the men who were already inside. The moment that forced the American military to take the tunnel threat with absolute seriousness arrived during Operation Cedar Falls in January 1967, the largest American ground operation of the war to that point, involving approximately 30,000 troops in a coordinated assault on the Iron Triangle. The operation began on January 8th. Within the first 48 hours, clearing teams had located tunnel entrances at a rate that overwhelmed the available tunnel rat personnel. On January 12th, a team from the 25th Infantry Division's combat engineers entered a complex near the village of Ben Suk and discovered something that made the previous estimates look absurd: a tunnel section stretching more than 1.5 kilometers in a single direction, with side passages branching every 80 to 100 meters. The team leader, Specialist 4th Class Harold Roper, a 21-year-old from Kentucky, sent back a field telephone report describing an underground space large enough to stand upright in at certain junctions, with wooden reinforcements on the walls and electric lighting connected to a generator somewhere deeper in the complex. Command received that report and initially questioned whether Roper had misidentified his location. He had not. What Roper and his team had entered was a command and communications hub, and somewhere ahead of them in that tunnel, Viet Cong soldiers were deciding what to do about the Americans who had just crawled into their headquarters. The generator was still running. The lights were still on. Someone had been here very recently. What happened next in that tunnel unfolded the way everything underground happened, in fragments, in darkness, in a sequence that no one involved could reconstruct entirely afterward. Roper's team advanced toward the generator sound and encountered the first booby trap approximately 200 meters in, a tripwire grenade positioned at knee height across the passage. The point man detected it by touch before triggering it. They marked it and went around. 40 meters further, the tunnel split. One branch descended. One branch ran level. Roper took the level branch with one man and sent the other two down. The level branch ended at a wooden door. Roper reported hearing voices behind the door, low and urgent, in Vietnamese. He and his partner had no interpreter and no way to call for one. Roper pushed the door open and entered the chamber beyond it. There were 3 Viet Cong fighters in that room. The space was roughly 3 meters by 4 meters, lit by a single bare bulb, and the distance between Roper and the nearest fighter was less than 2 meters. The exchange of fire lasted, by Roper's own later account, no more than 4 seconds. 2 Viet Cong fighters were killed. The third escaped through a trap door in the floor that Roper had not seen. Roper was hit once in the left shoulder by a pistol round at a range so close that he described feeling the heat of the muzzle before the impact. He completed his report of the chamber by field telephone before accepting evacuation. The engagement was over almost before it registered as having begun. But this was not the end of what Cedar Falls revealed underground. It was barely the beginning. While Roper's team was in that command chamber, 12 other tunnel rat teams were simultaneously operating in the same complex through different entrance points, none of them able to communicate with each other, and none of them aware of what the others were encountering. This was the reality of tunnel warfare that Cedar Falls finally forced the Army to confront in documentary form. The official after-action report for Operation Cedar Falls recorded 491 individual tunnel entrances located and destroyed across the Iron Triangle, 23 kilometers of tunnel passages explored and mapped, and an estimated 2,500 Viet Cong fighters who escaped the operation by moving through the tunnel network faster than the surface forces could seal exits. The documents recovered from the command complex Roper's team entered included operational plans for attacks on Saigon and a complete order of battle for Viet Cong units in Military Region 4. Let me give you the numbers on what the tunnel rats faced during Cedar Falls specifically. In 18 days of operation, American forces lost 72 men killed and 337 wounded. Tunnel exploration accounted for a disproportionate share of the wounded, and because men entering tunnels encountered contact at ranges where every exchange of fire produced casualties on both sides. The Viet Cong losses inside the tunnels could not be fully verified. Estimated figures ranged from 750 to over 1,000 killed, but an unknown number of dead remained in collapsed or sealed passages that were never fully explored. The single most striking number from Cedar Falls is this: despite 30,000 American troops, 18 days of sustained operation, and the destruction of the village of Ben Suc, and forced relocation of its entire population of 6,000 civilians, the Iron Triangle tunnel network was operational again, within weeks of the operation's conclusion. The Viet Cong simply rebuilt what had been destroyed. What the survivors of tunnel rat operations described in the years after the war shared a quality that distinguished their accounts from almost every other category of Vietnam veteran testimony: a persistent and specific sensory memory of the underground experience that did not fade with time. Veterans interviewed decades later consistently described the smell first, a combination of earth, stale air, kerosene from lamps, and something else they struggled to name, which was the accumulated presence of hundreds of human beings living underground for years. They described the sound second, the way their own breathing became loud and strange, the way the pistol shot left a ringing that lasted hours, the way silence in a tunnel meant nothing, because silence on the surface meant safety, and silence underground meant someone ahead of you was also holding their breath. Harold Roper, who survived his shoulder wound and returned to tunnel operations after a 6-week recovery, gave an interview in 1989 in which he described the moment before entering a tunnel as the clearest thinking he had ever done in his life, a total narrowing of attention to the next 2 minutes. What changed in military doctrine as a direct result of the tunnel experience was substantial. The Army formalized the tunnel rat program, creating dedicated training protocols, issuing suppressed pistols as standard equipment, and developing chemical detection tools for tunnel atmospheres. The long-term lesson that American planners took from Vietnam's tunnel networks was the recognition that a determined enemy with nothing but time and labor could construct a defensive infrastructure that made conventional military superiority temporarily irrelevant. That lesson was written by young men who crawled into the dark with a flashlight and a pistol, and came back changed in ways that no debrief could fully document. War does not always look like what the movies show you. Sometimes it is 30,000 men on the surface and 1 man underneath them, in a tunnel barely wide enough to breathe, deciding in 4 seconds whether he goes home or doesn't. The tunnel rats of Vietnam were not extraordinary because of their equipment, or their training, or their numbers. They were extraordinary because the job required a specific willingness to enter darkness that no amount of patriotism or discipline could manufacture in a man who did not already have it. Some men had it. They were the ones who went in. The ones who didn't come back are still down there.